What's up, everybody? We are in the building. Life is just a Wave podcast special tonight, man. Hey, I apologize about the delay, man. Traffic was crazy on my way home today, man. But your boy Big Wavez is in the building, and we got a special guest with us here today, man. All the way from Last Second Sports. My boy Jessie is in the building. Jessie, how you living, brother?
I'm doing fantastic, Wavez. Thanks for having me on. It's good to be here. It's good to be here. I love watching your channel grow too, man. Congratulations. You're getting close to that 1,000 subs. That's when it starts to get good, man. That's when it starts to get good.
Yes, sir, man. I appreciate for you coming on here, man. Obviously, make sure to go and support Jessie's channel, man. Last Second Sports. Listen, we know that he's a San Francisco fan, man, at heart, but this guy has a great analysis of the NFL, different teams, prospects coming out of this upcoming draft, all of the different candidates that are coming out, prospects for the draft, man. So make sure you guys go and subscribe to his channel if you haven't done so already. But today we're going to go ahead and get into it. We're here to talk about quarterback prospects in a different perspective. You guys know that I've been very, very high on Bryce Young, CJ Stroud coming out of the draft. Shout out to Panther Superfan. A lot of different guys coming out of the draft. To me, Jessie, it's always been 1A and 1B and really no B, C, D, and E. But I'm brought you on here today to see if you can convince me about, playing C, D, E, and F, man, to see how those go along, man, and get your perspective on it. The first thing I want to say, too, is all signs are leading to the Carolina Panthers obviously selecting Bryce Young. That's what the media has been raving about. That's what, a lot of the coaching staff seem to be hinting at from some of the press conferences that come out yesterday. But what are your initial thoughts about the Carolina Panthers and the number 1 overall pick?
Yeah, man. First of all, just being there myself as a fan a couple years ago. Now, we didn't have the number 1 pick. We moved up to number 3. But just the excitement that we had during that time, kind of living vicariously through y'all, just because I understand how exciting this time is to be a Panther fan. And, normally I wouldn't really care about the quarterback prospects, but it's something that I tend to geek out on quarterback prospects and trying to figure out who's going to be the guy and predict their careers and those types of things. And this year I was like, you know what? I'm not going to do it. But then across the way, I've got the Carolina Panthers, and I'm kind of living vicariously through y'all. And I'm like, you know what? I got to figure out who this number 1 pick's going to be. I got to figure out who I would take. I got to have an opinion on this. And so here we are. We're a couple days away from the draft, and I've definitely got an opinion. But I just think first and foremost, it's a great time to be a Panther fan. It's a time to be excited. And I'm sure that there's a split in the fan base. I've watched the Panther channels. I've seen, hey, we want Bryce Young or we want CJ Stroud or even Anthony Richardson. Thank God nobody's saying they want Will Levis. That's the right move. Nobody should want Will Levis, in my opinion. But yeah, that's pretty much where I'm at is just, as a fan, be excited. This is a really, really good time.
I can tell you, Jessie, it's this is a off season for the Carolina Panthers unlike any other, right? I've been a fan of this team literally since they've been in existence. Born and raised here in Charlotte, North Carolina, reporting live from here now. And I can tell you I have not seen an off season where this team has been this aggressive. This coaching staff and this organization put this much, invest this much resources into really building a contender. Even in the Jerry Richardson days, and RIP Jerry Richardson, but even in those days, this team has been very conservative about spending in the offseason, about bringing in a certain coaching staff. And this is an offseason that I've never seen. So to me, it really symbolizes that this team is tired of losing. Obviously, we've had 5-6 losing seasons in a row where we have not made the postseason. A ton of transition at quarterback. We tried the Baker Mayfield experiment this past year, and it was ultimately an ultimate fail. We obviously tried Sam Darnold year before last, and, it didn't really work out the way that we did. The crazy part about that is, I thought that we could maximize Sam Darnold's potential, but we just weren't unable to do it. And even prior to that, we had Teddy Bridgewater and filtered in with a little bit of PJ Walker. So to be in this position and trading up all the way from number 9, what do you think it says about this team?
I think that it says that this team's aggressive, and that as a fan, you've got to love that because let me just kind of give you an explanation of where we're at as a team and as a fan base right now.
Gotcha.
So obviously very different positions. We're trying to win a Super Bowl right now. But what you're seeing, or you should be seeing from afar about the San Francisco 49ers is you can have the best team in the world, but if you don't have that quarterback, you're probably not winning the championship. If I took the quarterback position out and just said, let's put up the 49ers roster against any other roster in the NFL, you would probably choose that 49ers roster. But that's not enough to win a Super Bowl. And so I love what the Panthers are doing. You go and get your coach. He builds his squad as far as the coaching staff and what he wants. And then you say, you know what? We're going to go get our quarterback. This is not a short-term play. This is a long-term play. We believe in Frank Reich. We believe in this coaching staff. And we need to let him go get a quarterback that he believes in and that we can build around and try to go win a Super Bowl in a couple years from now. That is the right way to do it. You have to get that quarterback position settled, and hopefully you hit, right? Like there's always the possibility you don't hit. That is definitely a real thing, but you've got to try. I commend the 49ers for trying a few years ago. They're idiots for never really giving Trey Lance a chance. We'll see what happens this offseason. But, you know, you have to try to go get that quarterback. And if you don't have him, you're not going to win a Super Bowl. This day's game and age is completely different. You know, you can point to the Trent Dilfers and all these other guys that have won, the Joe Flaccos, the Nick Foles. It's not that type of game anymore. And even when you look at a Joe Flacco or a Nick Foles that go and win a Super Bowl, go look at their numbers in those playoffs. They were elite quarterbacks for 3 and 4 game stretches to go win a Super Bowl. You need elite quarterback play to win in today's game if you want to win a championship. And you've got to praise the Panthers for trying to make it happen.
Yeah, and in this past Super Bowl, I think kind of alludes to your point, right? You know, we saw Patrick Mahomes. Obviously, you know, we saw Jalen Hurts and what he's become. And you talking about swinging for the fences on Jalen Hurts, and look out what he's turned into. You know, I think the Eagles are a really good, well-ran organization. And to your point, both of these guys are elite quarterback prospects. You can argue that the quarterbacks were the difference makers in this past Super Bowl. And without having that, man, and like you said, in today's NFL, you're just not giving yourself the chance to win at all. And for us to go, like, honestly, it's almost an embarrassment to go 6 or 7 years without being able to solidify that position, right? Like, to hit, like, to swing for, it's one thing to try for a guy and hope that he really works out, Jessie, but you got to think about that. In that process, the Panthers also passed up on some guys in the draft. Hence the J.C. Horn draft pick. Granted, you know, we yet to see if he can really turn out to the player that he be. I think that he has that potential, but Mac Jones and Justin Fields were sitting right there. And no matter what your opinions are on that, that was still a year where we needed a quarterback. And the Panthers in the last regime, you can blame it on the rule error, whatever. A lot of fans like to blame it on that. But at the end of the day, like, the Panthers have had opportunities to solidify this position, and hence why we're in this position now. Do you approve of the approach, though, that they've taken of really not knowing, or at least quote unquote not knowing up until days later of the draft, not knowing who they're going to draft? How do you feel about that?
That's a little weird for me. Like I said, being a 49er fan, and when we moved up to number 3, there was no plan or there was no guy in mind. It was like, well, we're going to move up there. Now we can scout everybody comfortably. We'll see who falls to us. We'll make a decision. Now, it does sound like later on the decision was always Lance and Mac Jones. That's fine, but they didn't have that guy. It's not like they moved up and were like, okay, we're moving up for Trey Lance, or we're moving up for Justin Fields, or whoever that is. They're like, we're going to move up and we're going to figure out the process, and we're going to pick the best guy available over the next month based off of what we see and learn. I do feel like the Panthers are doing a little bit of that, and that does worry me a little bit, because you're leaving yourself open. Think about it like this. When the Buffalo Bills moved up or drafted Josh Allen, it was to get Josh Allen. Like, that was who they wanted.
Yeah, exactly.
When you look at the Kansas City Chiefs, they didn't move up to number 12 or whatever it was when they drafted Mahomes to pick a quarterback. They moved up specifically for Patrick Mahomes. It's usually because you have a guy in mind. Now, Doesn't mean that you're going to be right, but you would prefer to have somebody in mind and say, hey, this is the guy that we want, and that's what we're going to do. The Panthers, to me, seem like, hey, we just want the number 1 pick. There's 4 quarterbacks in this draft. We kind of like them all. We'll figure it out from there. Maybe, but the problem is I'm sure there are people in the front office that have difference of opinions. I know in San Francisco that's the case. I know that John Lynch wanted Mac Jones. I know that Kyle Shanahan wanted Trey Lance, and they're still split on who should be playing quarterback. And it's a problem 3 years later, and we're now going into the 3rd offseason in a row where 49er fans are debating Brock Purdy, Trey Lance, Jimmy Garoppolo, Trey Lance. Every offseason it's been the same, and that's because the front office has not been on the same page. And so let's hope whoever they decide to go with here this next Thursday, that all of them are on the same page. I think that is what is most important. And you cannot have leaks come out of the organization 2 years down the line if this kid's not who maybe you hoped he was, and say, well, we wanted so-and-so, but the coach wanted this guy. Like, that's what you can't have.
Yeah, I alluded to that, man, on my last episode of Midday Madness. There's been a lot of reports come out that there is some kind of division within the organization on about who should be what. And to your point, I 100% agree. I think it's honestly laughable that you're 8 days away and still claiming to the media that you don't know who you're going to draft. Like that to me.
I don't believe, though. I don't.
I don't. Yeah. I 100% agree with you. To give what we given up to move up, and just to dive into these prospects a little bit, we gave up a lot, right?
Yeah.
To get to where we are. Arguably one of our best wide receivers in Carolina Panther history, DJ Moore. Next year's first, some seconds down the line, and I think next year's second in 2025 second round pick. So we and obviously the number 9 pick this year. So King's ransom to move up to number 1. I think it was the right move. So let me say that it was the right thing to do. But I don't think that you make this move without knowing who you're going to get. And honestly, in my opinion, Jesse, and you can tell me how you feel about this. Would you make this move to number 1 and give up what you get to consider somebody like Anthony Richardson and the number 1 overall pick?
Yeah, I mean, if I don't know who I want, yeah, definitely. I mean, it's kind of the boomer bust thing, right? Like when the 49ers moved up to 3, that was the whole argument. That was the argument that I made. It was like, you can't go Mac Jones. Like, you don't move up to 3 to go Mac Jones. You move up to 3 to go Trey Lance, Justin Fields. Those are your options. Because Mac Jones is cool, but is he going to be a game changer? Like, does he have something special? Yes, he has a high floor. You probably can win with him, but you're looking for a game changer when you move all the way up. And exactly. You don't have to be uber athletic to be a game changer. There's multiple ways as a quarterback that you can be a game changer, but Anthony Richardson has that possibility to be a game changer. But then the flip side is like, well, you did give up a lot. Your job's on the line. You kind of got to play it safe a little bit too. And so how do you find that perfect prospect? I don't know, because you look at a guy like CJ Stroud and Anthony Richardson. I mean, they couldn't be more polar opposite than those two guys. I mean, they're completely different players. Then you got Bryce Young, who's, I mean, kind of a hybrid-ish. He's got more athleticism than Stroud. Yeah. He's accurate like Stroud, but then he's really small. He doesn't have the freakish athleticism. So it's really hard because you're choosing between guys that are polar opposites. And, Anthony Richardson, I think it's definitely worth a look. I don't know if I would have the guts to do it, but if they did, I mean, more power to them.
It's so your approach is definitely a little bit more subtle than mine, Jesse, when it comes to it, because Anthony Richardson, to me, I've always had him rated at that 3 and 4 range of my quarterback prospects, right? And again, his upside is something that it's through the roof. So he has a ceiling that is higher than the Empire State Building, right? I think that what he can become is absolutely scary, right? Like he has that type of potential in what he becomes. But again, to another point that you said, time is not of the luxury here in Carolina. This staff and the resources that were invested into this offseason by David Tepper, where Tepper pretty much opened up the checkbook and said, a blank checkbook, and said, make this team better, right? Think about what we did in free agency. Adding Hayden Hurst, Adam Thielen, which, a lot of people have written him off in his career. You went to go get Miles Sanders, who had over 12,000 yard rushing, 1,600 yards total last year as an every down back. On the defensive side, you signed Von Bell, a safety that had 4 interceptions last year for the Bengals, has a ton of playoff experience. The offensive line finished top 5 last year. There are some weapons that this team has been able to add. So to me, again, I think that Anthony Richardson has a high ceiling. I just don't think that the Panthers are in a position to take him at number 1 or even consider him at number 1 because they don't have the time to wait, right? To figure out if he can bloom into something, because I think that it is going to take time for us to really see what kind of quarterback that he is, right? I think that
how many year contract does Frank Reich have?
Frank Reich is on a 4-year deal. So yeah, he has 4 years to get it right. And
so they didn't give him the 6-year deal like a lot of these other coaches are getting. So
not at
his
all.
Timeline's definitely a little bit different.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, not at all. And I think Tepper learned his lesson by giving Matt Rule a 7-year deal. So he doesn't have a lot of time to get it right. I think Tepper's patient level at this point is probably at a 3. Because you got to remember something. Ever since he's purchased this team, it's been a losing organization, right? And his peers are probably sitting back, for one of the richest owners in the league, and for him to be a hedge fund founder and all of this type of stuff. He has to show that he can coach and turn an organization around to a championship team. The Panthers, again, this team has been in existence for 25, 26 years now. They've only had 6 winning seasons. Jessie, put that in perspective. 26 years and only 6 winning seasons total. That's not good.
Yeah, I will say this, though, and I want to throw this out there. Now, Mac Jones was a little bit different. He ended up being the best of the rookies for the 1 year, which I don't think there was really any surprise there. Now, who he is now is kind of more of what we expected. But if you look at the history of a lot of these mobile quarterbacks, a lot of the times it's a mobile quarterback that plays really well year 1. And the reason is because they have that second gear, that second thing they can rely on. It's like, well, if I'm not seeing the defense, guess what? I'll just take off and run and use my athleticism. And a lot of times, and I think Cam Newton was a great example of this. I don't think Cam was the most refined passer when he came out of Auburn. That's just my opinion. Maybe that's the hate in me from being an Oregon Duck fan. I don't know. But I, if you look at him compared to like a Peyton Manning, you know what I mean? Like he wasn't the most refined passer, but he was throwing to a lot of wide open guys those first couple of years, and especially that first year because his athleticism was through the roof, and you had to check that. And so now all of a sudden you've got deep digs that are coming wide open. Of course he's good enough to hit those. And so he throws for 4,000 yards his rookie year, which was kind of a shock to a lot of people. But you look at the yards of separation per route, I got to imagine that if that stat was around then, it would have been astronomical because of his athleticism just opened everything else up. So, I see the Anthony Richardson argument, but then the flip side is if you're that athletic, like just different level athletic, a lot of times as a rookie, you can kind of surprise people because you have that second thing that you can fall on. I'm not saying that he should play right away or that is going to happen, but I think you might kind of be surprised with somebody like that is that freakishly athletic.
Do you think the Cam Newton comparisons are fair? Cam Newton was a national championship winner and a Heisman Trophy winner in college. You get what I'm saying? He also was 6'8" when he came out. I mean, I think I see the similarities, but to me, if you're asking me, and again, this is just my perspective, Cam Newton was a better college prospect coming out than Anthony Richardson was. I 100% believe that year, there was obviously some arguments about who the number 1 pick should have been, that year, 2011, and he got drafted. But if you're comparing college careers and up until this point, it's all we have on Anthony Richardson, Cam Newton was definitely, to me, a better college prospect than Anthony Richardson was. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do agree with that. I mean, obviously the comparisons is like you're talking 6'5" versus 6'4". You're probably talking 245 to like 240. So, and then you're talking freakish athleticism. So, from a size standpoint and an athletic standpoint and an arm strength standpoint, I get it there. But if you're just saying, hey, if they're both in the same draft, is there a clear better prospect? Yeah, Cam would have clearly been the better prospect. No doubt about it.
Gotcha. So now to get into some of these prospects, man. We talked a little bit about Anthony Richardson. What are some things about his game that you really like, Jessie? Like, what are some things that you would say would make him potentially worthy of the number one pick, or for that reason, any team that drafts him? Which I also want to get your perspective on where you think he will land in the best fit.
Yeah, so here's what's interesting is I'm not a huge college football fan.
Right.
Like I said, I'm an Oregon Duck fan, so I watch those games. I'll watch big time bowl games, that type of stuff. But what I do is at the end of the season, I start pouring through all 22 film. I do have a nice little connect that can get me that. And so I start watching games. But what I find nice about that is I go into these games where I'm watching film. It's not a TV broadcast. And I don't know the scores of these games. I don't know the statistics of the players. I'm just watching the player for the player. I'm not like charting completions or none of that. I'm just looking at the fundamentals. I'm looking at what they look like as a prospect. And often what will happen is I'll watch these games, then I'll go look at the box score afterward. And I'm like, whoa, that's not what showed up on film at all. And I'll give you an example of this. As a 49er fan, Brock Purdy hit the wild card game against Seattle. He came in and just blew up. If you go look at Brock Purdy's stats in that game, you're like, oh my gosh, like this kid in his first game did all this. This is insane. But if you watch the flow of the game and you don't have the sound on, you're just watching the film, you're like, how did those numbers come from that play? This guy was missing throws all over the field. He was missing reads. He was missing throws. It didn't look good for a big chunk of that game. And so you come away with a different perspective. Now, obviously, I know the results of the game, and so maybe that would skew my opinion if I went back and rewatched it. But in these instances, I don't have that. I'm just strictly going off the film. And so the games that I watched from him were Tennessee, LSU, and Georgia. Obviously, athleticism pops right through the screen. I mean, you're talking about a freak athlete. When I chart plays where I was like, wow, this guy had a wow play here, literally audibly made me say wow all the time. I mean, in 3 games, I said wow 9 times. If I take the other 3 quarterback prospects and add the wow plays together, I came away with 5 wow plays. So obviously you're talking about an electric athlete here, completely different ball game. But what I liked most about him, and this is what I found interesting, everything I had read about him going into this process was like, he's the most unrefined, raw quarterback ever, super athlete. And can you hone in the rest of it to figure out how to play the quarterback position? Like, so this is the thought I have of him coming into it. But when I left those 3 games, I didn't see it that way at all. I was actually shocked at how refined he was. Now, let me be clear. His accuracy, there is some things there that need to be worked on. There is no doubt about that. But when I'm just talking about playing the quarterback position, I look at things like pocket presence, going through your reads, being calm in the pocket, stepping up in the pocket. He's actually really good in these areas. Very good. In fact, I would argue that his pocket presence, from the ability to step up into a clean pocket versus fading back into a pocket or sliding out of a pocket or running too early from a clean pocket, is the best out of the top 4. That was really surprising to me. Very surprising. And so for me, I'm like, okay, there's some things that you can build on here. You look at the strength. I mean, that is obvious. His throw out of sack is like, I mean, if this is a Madden rating, we're talking a 99. It's incredible. Absolutely incredible. So that, that was it. And then I would say this, I didn't feel like he spammed his athleticism either. What I saw was a quarterback when he would look to take off, often as he's approaching the line of scrimmage, he prefers to throw the ball or would prefer to try to throw the ball before he just takes off. And I saw that an awful lot. And so I'm like, okay, this kid actually wants to play the quarterback position. Of course, he knows he can use his athleticism, but there is a lot of times where, hey, he'll take a check down if it's there. If he's approaching the line of scrimmage, he still keeps his eyes downfield. Those are all good signs. And so for me, yes, there is definitely some areas of his game that are very raw and need to be refined, no doubt about it. But there are other areas of his game, the little minute things that it comes down to when playing the quarterback position, that I was shocked at how refined he actually was in some of those areas.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think you hit it spot on. Jesse, listen, man, one thing I will definitely say about AR-15 game is, and you hit it right on the nail. Listen, his game in the pocket is absolutely phenomenal, right? Like, he has like a sixth sense when he's in the pocket, man, of being able to feel pressure, especially coming from the back. And in the NFL, you obviously have to be able to do that because you have pass rushers like Nick Bosa, who causes, havoc for everybody. And, that part of his game, I have no question that he can be at an elite level and play at a starting level here in the NFL. What my biggest concern, obviously, with it, and you could kind of see, and somebody even brought this up on one of my lives, and I want to get your perspective on this too. In the NFL, you have literally this amount of room for error when passing the ball. And I think having Cam Newton as our quarterback for several years, I kind of see that. I kind of saw that. They tried to do everything that they could to fix Cam Newton's accuracy, right? Obviously, he had a tendency of throwing the ball high, with wide receivers, and he struggled on short to intermediate routes.
Yeah.
And that's one thing for AR-15 that I definitely see that he needs to really improve on. And honestly, if you watch this pro day, he struggled on those running back routes out of the backfield, the wheel routes, the routes in the flat, throwing those. That stuff can be coached up. But honestly, I don't think that a lot of people think that accuracy is something that can be easily taught, man. And anybody that's know football or played football, it's really not that hard. It's not that easy to teach that, especially at that level of, where you are in the NFL. When you're younger, there might be a little bit more things that you can do to kind of refine that. But once you get to the NFL level, it's really hard to teach somebody to be more accurate. I don't think outside of Josh Allen, and I think, matter of fact, you said this, honestly, outside of Josh Allen, I can't name too many players that came off, started, was inaccurate with the ball and just progressively got better throughout their career.
Yeah, and I would say even Josh Allen, I think his inaccuracy was a little bit overstated, because what I saw from him when I watched him coming out was a player that was asked to throw in a lot of really crazy tight situations, tight windows, overly tight windows, and asked to do a lot. I do see a little bit of that from Anthony Richardson. I mean, I'll say this. I think Florida, whoever their play caller is, it's atrocious. It is absolutely atrocious. I don't know how many times I'm looking at it going, hold on a second. You've got a 3rd and 7. You're running a flood concept to one side of the field, and everybody's 20 plus yards downfield. You don't have a check down option. You don't have anybody going to the other side of what are you doing here? What kind of play call is this? Like, try to get a first down. And so a lot of times he has to go play hero athletically because they're not doing him any favors there. So I definitely see that. But, it's interesting because you'll see the best wow throw you've ever seen in your entire life come from this kid. And then the very next throw, you're like, whoa, what the hell was that? And not much different really than Zach Wilson coming out. And that was one thing I said about Zach Wilson was I didn't like him coming out. I called him a professional dunker because he could make all the wow throws. Like if he's in a dunk contest, he's going to win. I want to see you dribble the basketball. Can you even dribble a basketball? Like, that's cool. You can dunk, but can you dribble? And I felt like he couldn't dribble. He couldn't hit the layup throws. And I thought his athleticism was way overrated. And so he would get himself in trouble. And so, slightly different than Anthony Richardson, because obviously Anthony has that athleticism, but very similar in like, hey, man, you're kind of a specialist here. You got a deep ball, a crazy, crazy deep ball, and you got a rocket arm. But can you hit those layups consistently? And if you can't, it's a death sentence.
Yeah, and that's obviously just my biggest worry on him with him. Like, to be completely transparent, there are plays like, and again, I've watched obviously Anthony Richardson play live. Being an LSU fan, obviously we played for seeing, him up and close and listen, the kid is special. He has a talent that you cannot teach, right? And a skill set that is really, just a natural skill set. Like you say, he's a freakish athlete, man. And again, I think that his skill set is scary good, right? Like it's scary to the point where I think that he actually has the potential to be a top quarterback in the NFL in the next 3 to 4 years if he's put into the right system. And to talk about fits, if you're asking me right now, and I think that you talked to me a little bit about this off air, Indianapolis Colts, Shane Steichen. I think that you hit it on that, and maybe you can elaborate and tell some of the people why you think that it's the best fit for him.
Yeah, I think one thing too that we have to give Anthony Richardson credit for is he's very, very smart. And a lot of times when you get these athletic quarterbacks, they get pigeonholed into this, hey, that's all they are. That's not the case with him. Like I said, he does try to play the quarterback position. He would prefer to do that if he could. And he's very intelligent. I mean, you've got that S2 cognition test. He aced that thing, which is basically a post-snap read test, which means he knows how to go through his progressions. He's just got to figure out the accuracy part. And can he do it? When you have a quarterback like that, you have to go all in on their development. You have to have all hands on deck. And this is where I think the 49ers made a major mistake with Trey Lance. Trey Lance is not that dissimilar from Anthony Richardson. There's a lot of similarities here. Now, I think Trey Lance was a more refined passer coming out. I think Anthony Richardson's definitely a more freakish athlete, but a lot of similarities. And there was definitely some mechanical things with Trey Lance that needed to be worked on. However, there's two ways you can approach this. You can go the Kansas City Chiefs route, where they knew that Patrick Mahomes was not a finished product, and they sat him for a year. But you got Andy Reid going all hands on deck. He's going to Texas Tech. He's learning his offense. He's doing whatever he can to make his life easier. Or you can go the Kyle Shanahan route, which in year one, when he was asked, hey, how do you help a quarterback with his mechanics and make sure that he can improve on that and help develop them? And his answer was, we don't do that here. This is the NFL. You do that in your own time and you come back ready to go. Okay, well, you probably shouldn't take a kid that needs work in the top 3 if that's your attitude. Agreed. So when you look at it, you have to have patience. You have to have a guy that's willing to go through that with them. You look at the Indianapolis Colts, unlike Frank Reich, Shane Steichen has a 6-year deal, I believe. He just came from a situation where he worked with Jalen Hurts, who clearly wasn't refined either. And look at what he's helped turn him into. Now you've got the perfect pairing. I really think, and can you imagine a Taylor and Anthony Richardson backfield where you've got a mesh point and you got to make a choice between those two athletes? Good luck.
Yeah. And, it's that I 100% agree with all of the same reasons that you said. I think the Indianapolis Colts make a lot of sense. Obviously, Shane Steichen, what he did with Jalen Hurts, man, was absolutely remarkable, right? This was somebody that I think a lot of people were writing off just a season ago with Jalen Hurts, saying that they don't think that he could be the potentially starting quarterback. If you remember early in his rookie year, they were even considering drafting another quarterback and so on. So that conversation came out. So I think that it is because that's a situation where they can afford to be patient, right? You get what I'm saying? Jim Irsay has made obviously some questionable decisions over the last couple of seasons. We definitely wouldn't want Jim Irsay as an owner. No disrespect to Colts fans, but I think that is a situation where he can grow. Like you said, Jonathan Taylor is young. He will be young. The offensive line is there. They have some cognitive pieces there. Obviously, Michael Pittman at wide receiver. So they can build into something special. I really think, and I think he has to be in a situation where he has time to grow, right? So to me, that makes obviously the most sense for Anthony Richardson. But again, we won't know if that's really what's going to happen, man, because there's a lot of teams that seem to be wanting to move up in the top 5 all of a sudden.
For sure.
Yeah. So what are your thoughts about that, man? And a lot of these teams, the Cardinals are looking to move out of that number 3 spot as well. And obviously the Houston Texans seem to be wanting to move out of that number 2 spot if they're not able to get Bryce Young. So what are your thoughts on those 2 moves, man, from those guys? And what teams you think would be interesting to come up to try to get a quarterback?
Yeah, Arizona doesn't surprise me. Once Carolina moved up to number one, I was like, oh, Arizona's got the best pick in the draft now. Now they're playing with house money.
Yeah.
They can either draft a really good player or they can trade back and get a king's ransom because somebody's going to want to jump the Colts, assuming quarterback goes 1-2. Well, if there's a guy you like between, let's say it's Richardson and Levis or Stroud and Richardson, whatever that looks like, if there's a guy you like, well, I would hate to be the Colts, man. You got to figure out how to probably pick swap here and get to number 3 is what I was thinking. But then all of a sudden this rumor comes out that, well, the Texans, they thought Bryce Young was falling to him. And if it's not Bryce Young, they want no part of it.
Right.
CJ Stroud makes a lot of sense because he has the same agent as Deshaun Watson. Exactly, I think the writing was kind of on the wall that pairing was never going to happen.
Right.
But, Anthony Richardson's there. They obviously don't like him as much. And interestingly enough, you've got a lot of people who just came over to the Houston Texans from the San Francisco 49ers. Let's not forget what the 49ers did when they had the second overall pick. When those guys took over a franchise, they went and traded back one position and then drafted Solomon Thomas. They didn't even look at Patrick Mahomes or Deshaun Watson or any of those guys, Mitchell Trubisky even. They didn't care. They weren't going quarterback. They were going to build the team and then try to get the quarterback. So now you've got a regime over in Houston that came from the San Francisco 49ers. Maybe they're looking at it and saying the same thing. They're like, we really like Bryce, but if it's not Bryce, we don't care. We're going to draft best players available. We're going to build this team. Maybe we get a quarterback next year. Maybe we trade for a quarterback. I don't know, but we're cool not taking a quarterback and we're fine to trade back. So it is an interesting choice that we may see coming up, but I don't know how much of it's a smoke screen. And that's what interests me with Carolina. All of a sudden, Bryce Young's your guy. I felt like that one kind of came a little bit out of nowhere because it really seemed like it was going to be CJ Stroud. But now it's Bryce Young. You're all sold on him. He's the pick. Is that to make Houston panic a little bit so you can pick up a couple extra picks here or there? You really like CJ Stroud. You know they're going to go Bryce Young. You go to 2, you're still going to get Stroud, and then you can pick up a couple extra seconds. Or do you just really like Bryce Young? I don't know. It's an interesting thing that's going on.
Yeah, I don't know if you obviously heard the report that the GM put out about CJ Stroud and being very hard in coach and so on and so forth. I don't know how much of that stuff is true. Really, he's the only source that I've heard say anything about that.
Whose GM said this?
This was a former GM, writer now for I believe NFL Network. I can't think of his name. Tannenbaum. If it wasn't Tannenbaum, it was one of those former GMs that were a part. But he stated that in his article, that CJ Stroud was a hard coach guy, meaning that he was very difficult to coach, and that he's not a guy that really goes along with what your philosophy is. He kind of just does what he wants. He was the only guy that I heard say that. Lombardi. That was his name, BMOS. Thank you for clearing that up for me. It was Lombardi. Not Vince Lombardi, but Joe Lombardi. Mike Lombardi, whichever one. And he came out and said that he was very hard to coach. I don't know how much of that I believe, because throughout this whole process, and I've probably watched every CJ Stroud interview from when he was in college all the way up until this point. I obviously heard how the head coach at Ohio State, talks about him. And then, man, listening to this guy, I just don't get that, right? I do think that it's strange that the Panthers have switched perspectives about it, but I think that this is something that they've wanted to do, Jessie. Now, really take a walk with me here. The Panthers had made it very clear throughout this whole draft process that they were going to take their time to get to know these guys as individual people, that they were going to get to know them a lot better before making a decision on what was going on. Now, to some people, the only thing that stops Bryce Young from being the number one consistent overall pick is his size. So that's to a lot of people out there in the NFL world, that his size is the only thing that stops him. And when I'm comparing apples and pears, honestly, they're 1A and 1B. Like I've always said that they're 1A and 1B. all of the throws that I think CJ Stroud has a little bit stronger arm than Bryce Young. I will give him that. I think his arm is a little bit stronger than Bryce Young. But I also believe that Bryce Young is a better processor and can read defense a lot better than CJ Stroud. Right. And again, that's finding something to pick at because CJ Stroud is obviously awesome at that, doing that as well. Playmaking ability, I'm going to give that to Bryce Young. I think that he's a better playmaker than CJ Stroud. Not saying that CJ Stroud can't escape the pocket, but Bryce Young is like Houdini. He reminds me a lot of young Deshaun Watson in the NFL, being able to escape out of tackles and get out of the pocket and so on and so forth. And I think the misconception that Bryce Young is a running quarterback, I think I said this on my live yesterday, the man only had 185 yards rushing last year, like total, like for the whole season. I don't think that he's a rushing quarterback. I think that he's a quarterback that has the ability to escape and run if he needs to do it, but he definitely looks to pass first, okay? For the Panthers, it is a shocker that this has changed. I've been trying to identify one solid reason why Bryce Young has become the favorite. And honestly, the only thing that I can keep coming down to, man, is that, you know, it was reported out there that the Panthers spent significant time with Bryce Young's parents last week on his visit, and that they were really impressed with his maturity level. An article that I posted in my community section today, Scott Fitterer came out and said that talking to Bryce Young is almost similar to talking to a 40-year-old person, even though he's 21 years. His knowledge of the football game, being able to break down the X's and O's. Obviously, the S2 test that he took, he scored the highest out of all prospects coming out. Those would be the only things that I would be able to look at, Jess. I really could not tell you what made the pendulum swing.
Yeah, I also want to say this because I feel like this happens every year with somebody. And this year it's CJ Stroud. There's always a player that is super high on everybody's board. And then about a week or two before the draft, every bad thing that can come out about him happens at the same time. Right. This year, that prospect is CJ Stroud for whatever reason. So now he's not coachable. He's horrible at the cognition test, which, by the way, is not true. Yes, and he's not showing up to quarterback kid camps for Eli Manning and Peyton Manning or whatever. It's like, come on, man. Like, really? All this is just all of a sudden coming out. Now all of a sudden he's thinks he's too smart for everybody, but he's actually a dummy. And then he doesn't like kids. Like, what? How much more shade can you throw on a guy in a 2-day time span than what you're doing? It's wild. And so I feel like there's just some of that's going on right now. It's like, hey, CJ Stroud, you're the guy this year. Have fun with it. As far as it's just interesting to me. I don't know. How do you feel about that whole thing? Like all that stuff that came out about him. Like, how do you feel about it? But I just want to say this real quick. As far as the coaching thing, if it's true, reminds me a little bit of Josh Rosen. When Josh Rosen came out, that was kind of the knock where he felt like he was the smartest guy in the room. He wasn't afraid to speak up and ask questions. And a lot of coaches don't like that. And so if this is true about CJ Stroud, I could see it being potentially an issue depending on the coach. Right. But also, if I'm coaching a kid, I don't want him to just be like, yeah, coach, okay, got it. I want him to ask a why. It's okay to, hey, why would we do it this way? Like, explain, I need to know the why. Explain it to me. Some people need to know that. So is that all it is? Does he just need to know the why behind things? Or is it truly like, nah, I'm not doing that. If I was doing this, I'd throw a backside fade because of this safety. Is it like, how big of a deal is this really? And does it depend on the coach? I don't know. It's all kind of strange to me.
I believe it's nonsense. Ryan Day, who was a respectable college coach, never said anything like this about CJ Stroud, right? I don't even think anything like this in college has come out about it. To your point, this does happen every year. Hence Jalen Carter and obviously the issue that he, have, and he's probably going to slide a little bit because of those issues.
Remember Justin Fields and his epilepsy and all the other stuff? It was like, okay, wow, really? We're talking about something this kid had in like middle school that he's got under control.
It's ridiculous, but it also goes to show you, man, how much the NFL digs into the lives of these prospects, man. I mean, listen, if you're gonna get mad at a tweet that I made when I was in the 7th grade, in middle school. let's say, for example, I came out and said, hey, the Baltimore Ravens suck. And now if the Ravens don't draft me because of a tweet that I said back in when in the 7th grade that the Ravens suck, that's just kind of the pettiness stuff that the NFL looks at, man. And I think that this situation is similar to that. I don't see anything like that. I don't get any of those vibes from CJ Stroud. Granted, I don't know him personally, have not seen what he's like in practice and so on and so forth. But from the surface, I really don't see that. I think that this stuff is coming out here, man. And again, it's always one or two prospects that this happens to. I hate that it does happen, especially to a guy like him, because from what I've seen, man, he's a very humble kid. He's a guy that is like throughout this whole process, man, he could have, and that's what I will say that I respect about Bryce Young and CJ Stroud. Neither one of them had just come out and said, hey, I'm the number 1 overall pick, right? Like, and you know, that could come off to a lot of teams as cocky, conceited. Both of those guys just like, hey, whoever drafts me, you know, I'm going to go in there and give it my all. That's the kind of stuff that I want to see, because that's how you win over a locker room, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that was something that Bryce Young, I was watching his interview that he had on the Pivot podcast, also when he was on ESPN. You know, his mindset was like, hey, I got to come in there and earn it. You get what I'm saying? No matter, you know, I can't come in there thinking just because I'm the number 1 overall pick or I'm the guy, I can't think that I'm the guy. I literally got to go in there and earn it by the relationships that I build on and off the field. And that's really how I'm going to earn that C on my chest. But for CJ Stroud, for all of this stuff to come out about him is completely ridiculous, man. I don't think that it's fair. I hope that this is not some of the stuff that you know, the Panthers bought into, maybe. But I will tell you this though, Jesse. At this point, with us being this close, less than a week, you know, from the draft, I would be surprised at this point to hear CJ Stroud's name. I won't be mad. I won't be mad. But literally every single thing that you can look at is pointing to Bryce Young. And if the Panthers did draft CJ Stroud, I really would be surprised, but I wouldn't be upset about it either.
Yeah, you know, I don't know how much of this. I'm gonna play a little bit of conspiracy theory.
Yeah, go ahead.
The moment that Bryce Young became like the number 1 option, all of a sudden these things start to leak about CJ Stroud.
Right.
So think about it like this. If I'm the Houston Texans and I know I'm not drafting CJ Stroud, I know for a fact he's got the same agent as Watson. I want no part of him. I'm going to go on a possible smear campaign because I don't want my fans pissed when we pass on him. You know what I mean? So now I'm going to smear his name and do what I can to make it look good when I don't draft quarterback because I'm not taking the guy that I should take. Right. You know what I mean? Like that's just what it feels like. And I wouldn't put it past the Houston Texans. I mean, we know that owner has his hands in dirt. So that wouldn't shock me at all. It feels a little strange, the timing, how everything is played out. It seems a little bit weird to me how all this stuff is all of a sudden coming out about this kid because you heard nothing. You've heard nothing up until about 3-4 days ago. Now all of a sudden he's like the worst person in the world. It's wild to me. Absolutely wild. But you know, listen, if Bryce Young's the pick, I think all 3 of these guys, I think Richardson, Young, Stroud, I really wouldn't have a gripe with either one of them. I have a preference. My order would go CJ Stroud, Anthony Richardson, Bryce Young. That's me personally. But it's not such a gap to where I'd be like, man, if you take this guy, you're an idiot. Like, I wouldn't say that.
And that's what's so difficult about the Panthers this year, man. There's really no clear-cut number 1 must-have guy in this draft. And that's what makes it so difficult for, I guess, if they're still and listen, I'm not buying into it. The Panthers already know who they're going to draft. I mean, in this point, I have not bought into I feel like they have to say that they don't know who it is. Like, you know, even Scott Fitterer saying that, hey, I haven't told Bryce Young. You're not supposed to tell him that he has the number 1 overall pick right now, you know, especially at that point being still a week and some change away from the draft. But I'm with you. It's 2 guys only for me. Like, you know, I'm not putting Anthony Richardson in consideration for number 1. And you know, obviously that the reasons kind of what I spoke to earlier. I just don't think that we have the time for him to develop into what he can be. And again, I could be completely wrong about AR-15. He could end up being, you know, the next best thing. But from the surface of where we are right now, he is going to need a little bit of time. And time is not a luxury that we have here in Carolina. Look, the NFC South is wide open right now, right? With the Bucs in a rebuild, they don't have a quarterback. They'll be starting Baker Mayfield this year. Obviously, the Falcons, they've made some moves this offseason, right? They understand, just like us, that the NFC South is up for grabs, right? But, obviously Desmond Ridder is going to be the starting quarterback there for the Atlanta Falcons. So he's going to have to go through some growth pain. They're still extremely young on the offensive side of the ball. And then you have the New Orleans Saints. Yes, they brought in Derek Carr. Some would probably give them that leg up in the NFC South because obviously they have the most experienced quarterback right now. But I'm just not I don't trust Dennis Allen as a head coach, right? Like, I think that they have the talent. Alvin Kamara probably going to get suspended for a couple of games, but they brought in Jamal Williams. They have Michael Thomas, who we'll see if he could ever get back to the player that he is. But they do have an emerging wide receiver in Chris Olave.
Yeah.
So the Panthers literally are in prime position to really try to take a hold of the NFC South and be in the postseason again. And, this pick is going to determine it all. You get what I mean? So it's really CJ Stroud or Bryce Young for me. If you're asking me today, I really feel like the pick is going to be Bryce. I've been going back and forth, obviously, over these last couple of weeks of who I feel like it is. But I can see either one of them having success in this Panthers offense. Both of these guys are very talented.
Yeah. I think it all comes down to the team, too. Like I said, all these guys are close. Like, again, if the Colts had the first pick, I would say Anthony Richardson. Take Anthony Richardson. You have the perfect spot for him. Like, if he's going to flourish, he's going to flourish there. He's obviously got the highest upside. You've got to go Anthony Richardson.
Yeah.
But as the Panthers being there, I think it changes a little bit. And that's where I think, hey, I would probably, if I'm just ranking it specific to the team, I'm going Stroud then Young for the Panthers it would be my preference. But if I'm just ranking the prospect regardless of team, that's where I would say, hey, I'm going Stroud, Anthony Richardson, Young. So I think there is a lot of it that does play in it. And I think all those things matter most definitely. All I would say is I just hope that Frank Reich is the ultimate deciding factor because he's got to coach this kid. So if there is any division, which I'm sure there is, everybody's got their choice. Everybody's got their prospect. Yeah. I hope it's not the GM that makes the final say or the owner or any of that stuff. If there's a tie, I think it's got to be broken by Frank Reich because he's the one that ultimately has to believe in this kid 100% to be able to pour into him to get the best out of him, regardless of who that player is.
Yeah, I'm not sure if you're aware of the staff that we assembled this past offseason, but man, we put together an all-star staff.
It was like Power Rangers assemble, man. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Spared no expense, man, on getting, some of the most experienced coaches. The even crazier part about this, 3 of the coaches actually interviewed to be the Panthers head coach. So to get those guys to be on the same staff together is like, what the heck? Like, you get what I'm saying? So I think that they bought into what Frank Reich is trying to do, but I don't think the decision is going to come down solely on him. I really don't. I think that it possibly should. But if you're asking me one guy who's probably on the thinnest ice here in Carolina, and it's Scott Fitterer. You got to think about it. He's probably on the thinnest ice here. So I think that his input is going to be major here because you got to remember something. He survived, this last wave of getting rid of the last regime, right? He survived that. But, with everything, and again, this has been the most active offseason in Carolina Panthers history, not recent history, literally Panthers history. He has to deliver results. So I don't think the decision will solely come down to Frank Reich. I think that it will be a collaborative decision between Frank Reich and Scott Fitterer. And again, that goes back to the division conversation that we had earlier, right? Because one guy may be sold on this, right? Typically, Frank Reich has had bigger quarterbacks. He's had quarterbacks of size, we could talk about Andrew Luck, Jacoby Brissett that he had for a while. We could talk about Nick Foles. Excuse me. So Bryce Young wouldn't traditionally
Phillip Rivers, Carson Wentz.
Yeah, Phillip Rivers, all big guys, right? So he wouldn't necessarily fit the mold of what kind of quarterback he would traditionally have. But CJ Stroud would. So, but at the same time, when you hear Scott Fitterer talk about Bryce Young, he has nothing but high praises on him. You get what I'm saying? I don't want this thing to come down, man, to like you said, 3-4 years down the line. Now conversations are coming about, did we make the right decision? Because let's say that this thing does not go the way that we all planned, right? Because again, at the end of the day, we're all taking a risk with no matter who we're drafting at quarterback. If this thing doesn't come back to be, or at least get the Carolina to some consistent playoff success, you might start to hear all different type of things come out. Well, Scott Fitterer really wanted this guy, or Frank Wright really wanted that guy, and now all of a sudden we're back in the same place that we were this time last year. That is my fear.
That would be a major concern because all these guys start interviewing for the next job, and so they start throwing each other under the bus. But that's where, as the owner, I feel like he's got to step in and give the ultimate final decision to Frank Reich because, like you said, you've got a GM. The GM's going to be the scapegoat. If this thing doesn't work out, it's not going to be Frank Reich that is likely out the door. It's going to be the GM. So knowing that's the hierarchy is like, hey, if this doesn't work, GM's gone first, then the coach. Well, the coach is going to remain. So I would hope that he's the one that's like, hey, my final decision. Now, as an owner, I would say, I want you to collaborate. I'm going to lock you two in the room. You've got all the notes, all the takes from the coaches to the scouts to everybody else in this front office. You know where we're at as an organization across the board. But with all of that said, you have a guy in mind, and maybe that guy's the same, and then it's a really easy decision. But if it's not, then you two get in a room, you got 8 hours, and come out of that room with a consensus pick. And if you don't, I'm making the decision for you. And if I make the decision for you, I'm probably going to lean towards the coach because I'm going to fire you, Mr. GM, if you're not able to make this work. So you know what I mean? But that's the way that I would pose it is I want them to work together. I want it to be a cohesive unit. Obviously, everybody on this team is giving their input. And if they're not in agreement, then you lock them in a room and you make them come out of that room in lockstep, whatever that decision is. That's what I would do because it's super important, man. Because the reason the coach should have that decision more so than anything, they're with this player every second of every day throughout the season. You make the pick, and then it's like, okay, you're a figurehead, you're in the press box, you're whatever. You're not developing this kid, and you have to give him the best chance at success. And if that coach has 1% in him that's like, man, I wish you were CJ Stroud, or I wish you were Bryce Young, but whatever, we're going to make this work. I mean, that 1%'s enough to not get the most out of this kid. So that would worry me.
Yeah. And that's something that, that I am like really, really, concerned about going forward. So I just really hope that when the Panthers pick, here next Thursday, it's almost nerve-wracking at this point. You know what I'm saying? Because I feel like I feel like that they've really taken their time to figure out who is going to be. I kind of wish that we were in a situation that we would know by now, or at least they would make us feel like we know. But all signs are pointing to it. And listen, Vegas have even went and said that Bryce Young is the ultimate favorite, here, and they've closed the books. They're not even taking any more bets on the number 1 overall pick at this particular point in time. I think Bryce is the pick. I know who you would go with, Jessie, but who do you deep down kind of feel like the pick will be at number 1? Outside of, obviously, I know you have your order, but coming down to it, if you're in that room, in the fly on the wall in that room, what do you think the Panthers do next Thursday?
I mean, I'll say this. You go read every press clipping. You go read every major insider from that 2021 draft. And the number 3 pick was going to be Mac Jones. Open and shut case. Mac Jones was going to be a San Francisco 49er. I never believed it. And I said it was going to be Trey Lance the whole time. Ended up being right about that. I don't have a feel on this one, though. Like, you know what I mean? Because I don't. I have an opinion of who I would take, but I'm not so locked into this pick like I was with the 49ers, where it's like, I don't believe it. I don't believe anything that I'm reading. I'm not buying this Mac Jones thing. I feel like, yeah, if everything's coming out and saying Bryce Young, that's probably it. But then there is that side of me that's like, yeah, but they thought this in 2021 and they were all so wrong. And even to this day, there's still bitterness that comes from these guys. Any chance they get, like they try to make it seem like, well, just so you know, like it was definitely Mac Jones, and then at the 11th hour they changed their mind. No, they didn't. No, they didn't. You guys are just embarrassed that you got it wrong. And so I don't know if I want to just put everything into that and say, yeah, it's Bryce Young. I'll go against the grain. I'm going to go with CJ Stroud. I think that was the pick from the beginning. I think definitely Bryce Young's come on strong. But ultimately, I think CJ Stroud is the pick. I think he's the best fit. And so I'm going to ride with that. If I mock it, I'm mocking CJ Stroud, #1 to the Carolina Panthers.
Gotcha. Now, before I let you go, Mr. Last Second Sports, got to ask you a question about your boys. Because obviously the rumors have been coming out about Trey Lance trading over the last 24 hours. What do you think is going to happen there? I mean, I'm shocked that this stuff is coming out. Like, I really am shocked, because I mean, remember me and you had a conversation about this, and we said that Trey Lance was going to be the guy, but now it's looking like trade talks are heating up, and they said that Lynch is listening to conversations about potential trades for him. And well, that's something we might see on draft night as well.
I don't think so. I don't think so. I think it's going to take a lot to pry him away. And again, I think we've got a situation where we've got a split in the front office. We definitely have somebody who has media connections, and John Lynch. He came from the media side. He has a clear opinion. He never wanted Trey Lance, and he's the voice of the team. And so I think when anything leaks out, it's him leaking it and floating it to try to win over the fan base to get to his side. And so, now all of a sudden, Trey Lance can be had and all these other things. I think the ultimate decision maker is Kyle. I think Kyle still likes Trey Lance. I think Kyle would prefer that Trey Lance has at least one more chance, especially with Brock Purdy hurt, to see, because Kyle doesn't want to be wrong. He's the one that made the pick. He wants to be right. You know what I mean? So I think he wants to give it every chance that he can get. I think the draft's going to come and go, and Trey Lance stays. I think what would be best for Trey Lance would be to be somewhere else, be traded, get a chance. I don't know if it's going to work out here in San Francisco. I think they've completely played this about as wrong as you could. They just never really gave him a chance, Waves, and that's kind of what I'm saying. And I don't think Carolina's going to make that same mistake. But if they're thinking about it at all, and this front office is split, just look at what San Francisco's done. I mean, he had a chance last year to start, and this is what the fan base is split too. Like, I'll do a show, and I got people in the chat like, what do you mean he didn't have a chance? They gave him the reins last year. He didn't even have to compete. He just got hurt. Not their fault. You got to move on. Hold on a second. First of all, you find me a top 5 pick that has ever just not been given the job, whether it's year 1 or year 2. They don't compete.
Right. Exactly.
Like, if they compete, it's year 1. They may not win it, but halfway through the season, they're starting anyways, or year 2, the whole team is handed over to them. So year 2, he was quote unquote given the job, but they never fully bought into him. Whenever you take a guy #1, and this is going to happen in Carolina, and you're going to see it, or when you take a guy top 5, you're going to see every single thing, every press clipping, every flyer, every banner that hangs from the stadium is going to be a face of this quarterback you take. That never happened in San Francisco, not one time. Year 1, guess who the banner was that was hanging? It was still Jimmy Garoppolo. It should have been Trey Lance. When flyers were passed out, it wasn't Trey Lance that was on the front page. It was guys like Nick Bosa. When they did their behind their scenes of their training camp, which they call brick by brick, they weren't spotlighting Trey Lance. They spotlighted everybody but Trey Lance. The whole thing was fishy from the beginning. I never liked it. I never liked how it played out. And I think they've made a major mistake, because if Trey Lance gets his chance, I promise you this kid's going to be a stud, and it's going to look really, really bad on the 49ers, and they better find a way to win a Super Bowl with Brock Purdy, because it's going to get really ugly if they don't.
Yeah, absolutely. Couldn't say it any better myself, man. I think that Trey Lance is going to be a special guy. I was even at one point earlier in the offseason before the Panthers traded up to number one, saying that we actually should call you guys to see what you would want for Trey Lance. Because I think that, like you say, he just really hasn't had a fair chance. But I like this kid upside, man. I love his intangibles. I love, his arm. And again, man, he's another playmaking quarterback. So it's going to be interesting to see how things play out there in San Francisco, man. It really is. And you guys are welcome for Christian McCaffrey. I wanted to say that too.
For sure.
Yeah, he had a hell of a season this year with you guys, man. And a resurgence, you know what I mean? Because I think everybody counted him out here in Carolina, hence why he's with you guys in the first place. So I'm happy to see it, man. I'm glad to see that things going on. I think that you guys should be the favorite in the NFC this year. Obviously, the Eagles are going to be right there with it, but I think that they've lost a lot from their team this offseason. I don't think that the road is going to be as easy for them to get back. But for you guys, man, you guys are set up in a prime position. Whether it's Brock Purdy or Trey Lance, I think with the defense that you guys have and the playmakers that you guys have on the offensive side of the ball, you could go back there and quarterback Jessie, and you guys are still you just have playmakers all over the field. It's
definitely. But that, that's the kind of the argument that I've always had with Trey Lance. Like, first of all, when you look at Trey Lance and you break down the games that he's played, it's never looked as bad as some of these other guys. I mean, what was Justin Fields' second game was he threw for -6 yards in a game.
Yeah.
I mean, were you writing him off? No, that would be asinine. Trey Lance never looked like that. Trey Lance had one game where he played with George Kittle, where he had all of his weapons, and he played really good. He was 16-23, 40 yards rushing, 2 touchdowns, an interception, had a rushing touchdown that was taken off the board because a wide receiver who wasn't even near the play held somebody. He played really, really good in a Week 17 must-win game against the Texans. And then you start out this year in a monsoon, no George Kittle again. So in 4 starts, he's had George Kittle one time. Christian McCaffrey wasn't on the team yet. Elijah Mitchell, who was our starting running back, leaves after 6 plays. And you're playing in a monsoon. Oh, and by the way, Deebo Samuel is out of shape because he was fighting for a contract all offseason. But yeah, you're going to make a rash decision on a kid like Trey Lance. So we'll see where he ends up. Texans, I think, would be a great fit for him. If they want to trade for Trey Lance,
first round 2, is that what you guys would ask for?
I think a second round pick is what it's going to take. I think that would be stupid then, but if that's what it's going to take, if they can get that 33rd pick, maybe trade Trey Lance and give up a 4th rounder or something like that, and then now Houston has a clear board. They can take best player available at 2 or trade back and get more picks. They can take best player available at 12. Well. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. At 12, yeah. Imagine you go the best edge defender at 2, and then you go wide receiver at 12, and then you bring in Trey Lance. Okay, let's go. We're rocking.
At that point, they've ignited their rebuild at that point. You know what I mean? So, and again, man, the Houston Texans actually have some younger players. Look, remember, they drafted Mechie last year who didn't even play. Yeah, didn't even play. They have Stingley from LSU there, who's going to be a good corner man, here in the NFL. So they have some young pieces to build around. And plus, they have you guys, former defensive coordinators, as their head coach.
Yeah.
So, watch out for the Houston Texans, man. If they can nail this draft, hey, man, they could be in elite territory. If you're asking me, though, man, this season is going to be very interesting because I think that we're going to see a lot of teams that have not been traditionally in the conversation of being good that will be good this year. So, one last take, man, and we'll go ahead and end it. Lamar Jackson situation, man. What is your thoughts? I got to get your thoughts about it. This has been a big topic here on my channel. Who's in the wrong? Who's right? What should happen? And does something happen at all?
Yeah, I think he ends up staying in Baltimore. I don't know if it's a long-term deal, but he'll definitely be there this year. Obviously, the league has spoken. They didn't want Deshaun Watson to get that deal that he got from the Browns. Everybody was pissed that it was a fully guaranteed deal. They're not going to do the same for Lamar Jackson because they don't like it. And that much is clear. That's why nobody's putting in any effort to go get him, which is crazy. I think Lamar Jackson is a top 7 quarterback in this league. I think he's a hell of a player. I mean, the 49ers, I floated this out on Twitter and on my channel, and people were so pissed at me. I'm like, listen, if I'm the 49ers, I'm going to Baltimore, and I'm saying, all right, I got something for you. I'm going to give you Nick Bosa. I'm going to give you Trey Lance, and I'm going to give you next year's first, and you send Lamar Jackson over here. Because you put Lamar Jackson on San Francisco, that's a Super Bowl. I'm fine with that.
Bosa,
I'll pay Lamar Jackson $50 a year.
Nick Bosa.
Yeah.
Is it because you don't want to pay him?
It's not that. I mean, I have no problem with Nick Bosa being here, but let's say he gets $33 million a year. Yeah. You tell me, okay, let me ask you this. Let's look at the Detroit Lions. Okay,
we do have a defensive end up for it that has to be paid as well, because remember, Brian Burns has to be paid.
Yeah. But think about it like this. So let's take the Detroit Lions.
Yeah.
If you take the Detroit Lions and you say, all right, Detroit, we're going to give you Nick Bosa, or we're going to give you Lamar Jackson. And at the end of this trade, one of these players is going to take you to a Super Bowl. I mean, it's a no-brainer. It's Lamar Jackson. It's not Nick Bosa. You know what I mean? Like, as good as Nick Bosa is, he plays the third most important position on the field, because the way that you build a team is you draft a quarterback, and you protect a quarterback, and then you go after opposing quarterback. So Nick Bosa fits number 3. Lamar Jackson fits that number 1 need. You put him in San Francisco, they're winning a Super Bowl, no doubt, in the next 2 years, even without Nick Bosa. So for me, I'm like, this is a no-brainer. Of course, most people don't like that. That's totally fine. And it's not going to happen. But I think the Baltimore Ravens have made a mistake here. They should have signed him 2 off seasons ago when they had the chance.
Right.
And now they're paying for it. So I think he'll be there this year. We'll see what happens going forward.
Yeah, I'll say my last piece on the Lamar Jackson situation. Again, the Baltimore Ravens, to me, are idiots in this situation. Listen, you don't allow a franchise quarterback this long without being paid, right? I mean, he's played on the 5th-year option. Honestly, what else do you want him to do? Granted, he's had some, injuries over the last 1 or 2 years, but when healthy, Lamar Jackson is definitely a top 10 quarterback in the NFL, hands down, right?
Yes.
I don't care how much people want to question if his style of play can win you a championship. Listen, just because it hasn't happened yet doesn't mean that it won't happen, right? And another thing about Lamar Jackson that I feel like a lot of people seem to just brush under the rug. When has Lamar Jackson had a clear-cut number 1 wide receiver? His best weapon is Mark Andrews at tight end. And the last time I checked, you can't win a Super Bowl with just a great tight end, right? Literally, it's no way that it's going to happen. You have yet to give him that. You bring OBJ in, which to me, I think that was a good starting point on it. But let's be real. We don't know what OBJ still has left. We don't know if these injuries are going to start beginning to plague him. You drafted Rashard Bateman. He hasn't been able to stay healthy. You traded away Philly Brown. What I will say, though, is this. I think he ultimately will end up staying in Baltimore, and then people are wondering why other teams haven't, been able to, offer anything. Well, it's because no team they don't want to give up 2 first-round picks, right? Giving up 2 first-round picks and offering a max extension, that's a lot to do in one season, right?
Yeah.
That's a tremendous amount to ask any team with. I think that every team would be interested in trading for Lamar Jackson if the Baltimore Ravens were not asking for as much as they're asking for to trade him, right? But 2 first-round picks, plus you're going to have to sign him to a massive deal. I think the Ravens honestly have shot themselves in the foot at this point. Now that Jalen Hurts got his money, his 2nd year into his playing years, the deal I see for Baltimore and getting the deal done in order to make it a sweet box, I say $215 total, $175 guaranteed.
Yeah, I mean, now that Jalen Hurts has gotten paid, it hurts him even more. Like, this is only helping Lamar Jackson right now. It's only helping Lamar Jackson. Every time somebody else gets paid, if Burrow gets a deal, Herbert gets a deal, Lamar Jackson's getting more money every time somebody else gets a new contract. So he's sitting back. Now, what I think Baltimore tried to do with this transition franchise tag, where it's not the traditional one, they were hoping like, hey, we're going to let the NFL kind of play. They're going to sit back and kind of be the counselor for us. So we can't come to a deal we're going to let another team come in and play counselor, offer him a long-term deal. He's going to accept it. And then we're going to swoop in and be like, all right, we'll pay it. We're good. But nobody's doing that. Nobody's going to do that because they know that's what you want to do. And so now you've just shot yourself in the foot. It sounds like the deal that they offered was like 3 years, 133 all guaranteed or 135 all guaranteed. You can't do that. You got to give him a 5-year deal. He wants his 150 to 200 guaranteed. And that's the way it is. You're going to have to deal with it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And what is 187 doing in here? What are you lurking over here for, bro? He's funny. He's actually really funny, man. He's always in my chats. He's one of the Purdy guys, and so we always have some fun back and forths. That is funny that he's over here, though. I don't know if he's like running out of content on the San Francisco side, and he's like, hey, let's go check out, see what the number 1 pick's going to be, or if he's normally in here or whatever, but it's funny.
Jesse has the Force, man. He is a Jedi, man. He has the Force, so wherever he goes, everybody's going to sense it, man. But, hey, listen, Jess, I really appreciate you, man, for pulling up to the channel, man. You don't understand how much of an honor this is to get your perspective on the Carolina Panthers. Obviously, exciting times for us right now. This has probably been one of the most exciting off seasons that I've experienced. Obviously, I've been going through nothing but pain and misery around this football team over the last half of a decade. So we have to nail this, Jess. Like, we have to nail this because, again, if we don't, we're just going to continue to be in flux, man. So whatever it is, if it's CJ or Bryce, I think that they're the only two in consideration at this point. But either CJ or Bryce, I feel like both of them will be able to come in here and be successful. I did not ask you about Bryce Young's size. And, 1 minute, man, for you to elaborate on that. Do you think his size is an issue?
I don't think so. I mean, when I was taking notes on him, I didn't even mention his size. I don't think he doesn't play small. He doesn't play undersized. Anybody can get injured. But also the quarterback position is the most protected it's ever been. So I wouldn't be as worried about his size by any means. I think if he's going to get hurt, he's going to get hurt. So that doesn't worry me.
There you go.
You know what I mean? Like, it just doesn't worry me. So size is like the least of my worries with Bryce Young.
Yeah, absolutely, man. And, again, I thank you for saying that, too, because to me, it doesn't matter if you're 6'5" or 5'6". Injury can hit anybody at any time in the league, man. There's too many quarterbacks that I can name that have been dealing with the injury bug. I feel like Josh Allen, if he keeps playing at the level that he's playing at, you're going to start seeing him be able to wind down here a lot soon, too. So, but Jess, man, again, thank you so much for coming to the channel, giving your perspective, man. It was a blessing.
Absolutely, man. Thank you so much for having me on, Waves. Definitely. I'm excited for y'all. Have fun. Congratulations. Enjoy it. It's going to come and go. And then you guys are going to have 2 months of arguing because there's some fans that are in here that are like, we should have taken this quarterback and we should have taken this quarterback. And then you've got to sell to them why it was the right decision or the wrong decision. And it's going to be a lot of fun. So I'm actually looking forward to what happens after the show. I can't wait because if it's a quarterback that either you're not happy with or your fan base is not happy with, bro, it's going to get real fun.
Yeah, absolutely, man. And then to the listeners out there, guys, we will be doing a live draft reaction. It's beginning at 7:45 p.m. Eastern on draft night. That is on September the 27th. We are literally, April the 27th. We are literally about 7 days away from the draft, man. So everybody get your popcorn ready. We are up first already on the clock. So it is going to be interesting to see what name is going to be called then. Again, man, thanks everybody for coming, man. If you're new to the channel, Purdy 187, man, listen, you're always welcome here in the channel. Even you from Charlotte. So if you live in Charlotte, definitely glad to have you over here on the show, man. And to all of my followers, make sure you guys go and support Jessie as well over at Last Second Sport, man. Great content. Listen, I don't know anything about the San Francisco 49ers, but I pull up to this guy's lives because, one, they're super entertaining, and secondly, man, he is able to give you perspectives from a game that you just have not heard. So thank you again, Jessie. And this has been another episode of Life is Just a Wave podcast special. We will see you guys on the next Midday Madness. Everybody have a blessed one.